Welcome back. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely affected New York in a great way, leaving the city's economy in trouble and also those who were once employed to deal with the possible potential economic fallout. Well, many tenants are now in fear of potentially losing their homes or also where they're renting from, facing eviction. Also, Governor Cuomo extending the eviction moratorium until August the 5th. Many individuals are actually saying they're actually worried about what is going to happen about the unpaid rent accrued since the beginning of the pandemic. Joining us to share a little bit more in this discussion and talk about the very serious nature of rent evictions, the moratorium, is Tenants Rights, and also giving us some insight is partner at David Gallo and Associates, Robert M. Link. And Robert, good to have you.
Daren, great to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, you come at a very critical time. We're talking about August the 5th, and for some, that's like a long time away. Others, it's right around the corner. But it deals with the eviction moratorium. And for our viewers who may not be so familiar with the eviction moratorium, why don't you give us a little bit more information about this eviction moratorium and what this all means?
Okay, here's where we are in the eviction moratorium. As everybody I think knows, or most people know, Governor Cuomo entered an executive order as soon as the pandemic hit and said, we're going to close the landlord-tenant courts. We're not going to do any foreclosures. We're not going to do any evictions. Recently, he issued an executive order saying that that moratorium is no longer in effect and has been, quote, superseded by legislation. What the governor was referring to when he said superseded by legislation, he's referring in the foreclosure context to legislation that requires many loan servicers to offer homeowners a forbearance or a loan modification or something of that effect. In the landlord-tenant context, the governor is referring to legislation that was sponsored by Assemblyman Dinowitz, and that legislation would say the landlord can bring a non-payment eviction, okay? But the tenant, in response to the non-payment eviction, can say, listen, I have a COVID-19 hardship, and because of that COVID-19 hardship, I have an affirmative defense to the eviction. You can't evict me. So you'd have to show, we don't know for sure, but I would assume unemployment papers, pay stubs showing a decrease in income, something to that effect, and that would be an affirmative defense to the eviction. Now, just because you have an affirmative defense to the affirmative defense to the eviction, that doesn't mean you don't have to actually pay your rent. The Dinowitz bill provided, and it was signed by the governor and is in effect, that bill provided that the landlord, even if they're unsuccessful in bringing the eviction, and even if the tenant is successful in showing that they had a COVID-19 hardship, in that scenario, the landlord would get a money judgment for the money owed, but they wouldn't get an eviction. Now, just because landlords can proceed kind of on this technicality, the way the law exists right now, we still haven't gotten any guidance whatsoever from the Office of Court Administration with respect to concrete plans to reopen the courts to the process that we're used to. I personally, okay, and I don't have the latest information of the ongoings inside the room where the Office of Court Administration makes these decisions, but I do check in on a regular enough basis. There are no concrete plans to go back to landlord-tenant court the way we all know landlord-tenant court, or the way some of us have been exposed to landlord-tenant court. What that means is I really don't expect a substantial amount of evictions in the year 2020. I think a lot of this is going to get passed off to 2021. It's just the landlord-tenant process, as we've always known it, doesn't really lend itself to gathering in close quarters and reaching settlements and conducting trials. They're going to very slowly bring some cases on the calendar with respect to emergency matters, with respect to trials that were scheduled before the pandemic, and start to bring this across slowly but surely, but nobody's in a hurry.
Well, you mentioned court, and when we talk about court and the court system, obviously huge backlogs pre-COVID-19. A lot of people have been literally waiting for their day in court. With all that's going on right now, and we know that the court system will see a higher number of people going to court dealing with this whole housing issue and the eviction process. Um, we're looking for a very long time coming with a lot of people in court and a lot of things happening, correct?
The court system is not equipped to evict, 30, 40%, whatever the number is the amount of tenants who aren't paying their rent right now. The court system is just not equipped to handle it. And what the Dinowitz bill did, what the legislature did, was actually very smart. They're saying we want landlords and tenants to come together and come to some sort of amicable resolution without having to go to court. The people who care about getting a money judgment against them, they will make a very good deal for the landlord probably, and the people who are really cash strapped and maybe not as concerned about having a money judgment against them, and just at the end of the day need a place to live, they'll hold out. And those people will eventually go to court. There'll be a trial over this issue of whether or not there was a COVID-19 hardship. And if the landlord loses, they'll get a money judgment, and the tenant can go to bankruptcy court and discharge, in a Chapter 13 or a Chapter 07 bankruptcy, that debt.
Well, you do deal with a lot of tenants and particularly tenants' rights. They're the ones who are really advocating for somebody to speak and really take their back. What is it the tenants need to know, and what are their rights that you would want them to know right now?
I mean, first of all, you have residential and you have commercial tenants. Okay. With respect to residential tenants, hold on. You want to try to pay your rent if you can pay your rent. If you can't, you want to contact your landlord and you want to work out an amicable resolution that's going to work for you, and it's going to, keep you in your apartment as long as possible. Okay. So that's something that you can do right now. In my view, it never works to just kind of duck from the landlord and not deal with the situation, because then the arrears become unmanageable, and you have a bad relationship with your landlord that doesn't help anybody. With respect to the commercial tenants, there's several rights. There's legislation pending. I just looked on the calendar that would say that the landlord cannot or must mitigate their damages, which means find another tenant if you're going to abandon your space. So that's another thing that you should consider. You should look very closely at your lease if you're a commercial tenant and speak with an attorney, because the lease particularly in a commercial landlord-tenant relationship is going to control how the situation kind of plans out. Another thing that's going to be interesting in the next several months, next couple of years even, is with respect to the commercial tenants. Those commercial tenants who weren't using their property. So you have a barber shop that was kind of shelved, or a salon that was shelved for several months, or if you have a dance studio who still can't get their customers in the door. Has there been a frustration of that lease contract? Has that lease contract been made impossible? And many lawyers are going to make the argument that if they had a lease for a barbershop and the government said you can't operate a barbershop, well, then should the rent be abated or canceled outright? And that's legal arguments that are going to play out in court. It'll be very interesting to see what happens, in the next year.
Well, Robert, I thank you. We got to leave it there. Of course, a lot of things to talk about, and we do know that the court system is going to be overloaded with a lot of cases. But thank you for bringing us the pertinent information, and also for tenants who need to know what their rights are, particularly at a time such as this. And if you want more information, all you got to do is visit the website at dagallo.com. And of course, we encourage you, stay with us. Don't go anywhere. We've got more open coming up right after this.